Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, 3 film geeks discussing movies, both new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
It's our first review show of 2014 and the first episode of Season 2. There are some great things in store for our second season of Film Fanatics, and first of all, we want to extend a sincere thank you to all of our regular listeners that have supported the show through our first 20 episodes. Please continue to spread the word about Film Fanatics, subscribe to us on YouTube if you haven't already, and follow us on Twitter if you haven't done so yet. Our handle there is @FilmFanaticsPod, and one of the new things we're going to be doing in Season 2 is extending our 5-word reviews to our Twitter feed. This is something that Justin came up with in the early stages of Film Fanatics, so he didn't tip his hat to his entire feelings about a movie, but just a quick little blip. So for some of the bigger releases, we're going to start posting our 5-word reviews on Twitter. So if you're not following us there, definitely time to start that. This week, we play a little bit of catch-up tackling our last couple nationwide holdovers from 2013, a couple of movies for the new year, and an Oscar hopeful that went nationwide this week. Before we get to any of that, though, we want to talk about the Golden Globes. Now, Joe has purposely kept himself in the dark about the Golden Globes winners, just to get your guys' reactions. Obviously, by the time the listeners hear this, the Oscar nominees will have been announced, but we're still a couple of days away from that. Usually the Golden Globes are at least an indicator or a barometer of what may or may not happen at the Oscars. So first, let's start with the best screenplay, and that went to Spike Jonze for Her. Joe, your thoughts on that?
I'm not surprised at all.
Okay. Justin?
It's Spike Jonze. I mean, the guy really works hard to get something good out there.
Well, best director went to Alfonso Cuarón for Gravity. Now, this was won last year by Ben Affleck, who didn't even get nominated for director at the Oscars. I can't imagine that's going to be the case with Alfonso.
I could see that. I admit I'm a little surprised considering some of the other directors from the films we watched, but it's not a bad choice.
I'm not surprised at all. I thought he broke a lot of ground with Gravity, and I think it's a completely deserved win.
Yeah, I suppose if Gravity's going to win anything, it would probably be in the directing category. I mean, obviously the Golden Globes don't have like the real technical ones that the Oscars have, but yeah, I guess if he would win anything, they may win Best Picture at the Oscars. Like I keep saying, I think it's going to be a close race between that and 12 Years. Maybe American Hustle thrown in, but I think director, maybe he does have locked up at the Oscars. And it used to go hand in hand that the Best Director won the Best Picture, and it has happened infrequently in other ways, but the last few years it's been happening. You know, Ang Lee won for Life of Pi last year, and obviously did not win Best Picture. So in the acting categories, it was quite interesting. Both actresses went to American Hustle. Amy Adams and Jennifer Lawrence both won. Wow. And this is for the comedy category because the Golden Globes differentiates. And supporting actor went to Jared Leto.
Well deserved.
And actor went to Leonardo DiCaprio for Wolf of Wall Street, which I thought was a big surprise.
Absolutely. I'm not saying he didn't give a good performance. He did. He usually does. It's just with all the other stuff that has come out this year with so many great performances, it's kind of a surprise that it just went to him.
I don't know. I think that it's good to see Leo win anywhere. I thought he gave a great performance. He sold the character to me, and as far as the female actresses, just, you mentioned, I totally agree with that.
I was going to say, hard to argue with either performance in American Hustle. It's probably the best thing about the movie.
For Best Actor and Actress in a Drama, you had Cate Blanchett in Blue Jasmine, which kind of bummed me out a little bit. I was obviously pulling for Emma Thompson.
Yeah, same. It wasn't a bad performance. It just wasn't my favorite of the year.
No, I would say it was probably third or fourth best. I mean, the other ladies in this category include Judi Dench and Sandra Bullock, both of which gave, monster performances in those movies.
Absolutely.
So, and Best Actor Drama went to, this was a huge shock, I think, Matthew McConaughey for Dallas Buyers Club. I think the general thought was it was going to go to Chiwetel Ejiofor for 12 Years a Slave. So that was cool. He was very, very humbled and happy to be up there.
I think it's well deserved.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, last year has definitely been McConaughey's year for movies.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And he was only sort of on the sidelines in the conversation for being nominated as a possibility for the Oscars. So this may be an indication that he's maybe set for a good nomination there.
Hopefully.
And then finally, the Best Motion Picture, Comedy, and Drama. Comedy went to American Hustle. No surprise there with all the acting accolades it got. And the drama went to 12 Years a Slave, which I thought was also probably no surprise.
Very understandable, yeah.
Yeah.
I could agree with those.
Good Golden Globes overall. Not exactly the benchmark for what's going to happen at the Oscars, but certainly, maybe we'll see. And of course, again, by the time you guys are listening to this, the Oscar nominations will be out, so I'm sure a lot of those people and movies will be up.
Get ready for the excitement.
All right, well, let's start our new releases for the week. And first up, we're going to do Lone Survivor, which had one of the biggest January openings ever with almost $40 million in its first weekend, which was a surprise to pretty much everybody, including its own studio. Mark Wahlberg plays real-life SEAL Team 10 member Marcus Luttrell, and the film chronicles his team, including Taylor Kitsch as Lieutenant Michael P. Murphy, Emil Hirsch as Danny Dietz, and Ben Foster as Matthew Axelson, and their Operation Red Wings mission in 2005 in Afghanistan. The film also features Eric Bana as Lieutenant Commander Eric Christensen back on base. Now, I'm not really one for war pictures in general, and Lone Survivor is a particularly gruesome one. Maybe that makes it more realistic, but it's definitely hard to watch in certain scenes. For me, it's really nice to have this podcast because a movie like Lone Survivor I never would have watched. It's just not something I would be interested in, but I have to say I'm really glad that I did. Mark Wahlberg and Taylor Kitsch have really good chemistry together, and both are among who I believe can be up there with the next big action stars doing in their 40s and 50s, the types of roles that Liam Neeson and such is currently playing. I wish there was a little more character development in the movie and not so much full force action, and some of the dialogue is a little bit corny. If you've seen the trailer, you probably can identify with that. Lone Survivor for me really did hit a lot of the right notes in the sympathy and respect department, and it held my interest all the way through, even though it was a bit squirm-inducing, and I give Lone Survivor a B. Joe, what'd you think?
The thing that really stuck out to me about it was how I thought it had this incredible cinematography. I thought this movie had a lot of really great landscape shots, and it really brought me into the scene. And I think that's kind of how I felt throughout the whole movie. I felt like I was there. And that also kind of speaks to the way they wrote these characters. They made them seem very human. And that was also breathed through by the performances, particularly by Wahlberg. And it was also really good to see Eric Bana. I like him. It didn't really pull any punches, as Dan pointed out, and I can really respect that. And because of that, I really felt for the characters, and it really felt very grounded to me, and it was speaking to something that I think is very sensitive for a lot of people. But I think, kind of touching on what you said, it really focused on that sense of respect, and I liked that. I really did. I was really invested and interested throughout.
And without it being, like, corny. Like, we've talked recently about some propaganda-type films that we've seen for the Oscars.
And I'll be honest, I was kind of expecting that going in. When I saw the preview of this, I'm like, okay, it's going to be all about how America's great, we're the heroes, and we're going to go and we're going to get the bad guy, and that's basically going to be what it is. But I thought it was more than that. I thought it made everyone seem kind of human, and it was trying to be just honest, but without being too brutal, without being too tainted. And I really respected that. I wasn't expecting it. And that kind of made it a great experience for me. And it didn't try to paint all the foreigners in a negative light. I kind of respected that.
Yeah.
If I had to summarize this, I would say it was just really respectful. And it took me by surprise. Ultimately, I would have to give Lone Survivor a B+. I really enjoyed this movie.
Nice. Justin?
Well, I think you guys are both going to be a little bit surprised in what I end up giving it. As a producer on shows like Friday Night Lights, we've seen that the director of the film, Peter Berg, was really at his best when he's tackling realistic drama instead of attempting to make a Hollywood blockbuster, as we saw in 2012 with the awful action film Battleship. In Lone Survivor, Berg really gives the audience a brutal first-hand look into the world of being a Navy SEAL and the eternal bonds made through their training in the first few minutes of the film. As such, the movie flows beautifully and never ceases to draw intrigue, despite the actors occasionally giving goofy dialogue, but once the action hits, it's absolutely brutal and heart-stoppingly intense. That said, the action can go on a bit too long and sometimes feels a little over-stylized. They used more than a couple elements of slow-mo at times, and there were these rapid cuts that were supposed to show the impact of injuries, which sometimes came off a little bit bloated and repetitive. But it doesn't really take anyone out of the story, it just sometimes feels a little unnecessary. And the main example of that, I thought, was near the end when they just did this, 3-minute slideshow. It's nice, but I wouldn't say it was needed.
I think they could have done that over the credits. I don't
agree.
really understand why they didn't.
Overall, Lone Survivor is a good film that just has a few minor setbacks to keep it from being a great film, and I give it an A-.
I'm not uber surprised by that.
No, I think that's a grade I can accept. It was well done.
It was a really big surprise for me that I enjoyed it this much, to be honest with you.
Well, I think it was a surprise for all of us. Like Joe mentioned, I mean, I think we all sort of went into it thinking well, this is going to be terrible.
I thought it would be average, to be honest. Just because the trailers didn't really do it justice. They kind of made it seem like it's going to be this really hokey story.
In fact, when we were originally pitching ideas for the show here, with so many movies to see this week, Joe was like, well, Lone Survivor I can pass on. And then after Justin and I saw it, I emailed him and said, listen, Joe, you probably want to see this movie.
And I was really surprised. I'm like, really? Lone Survivor? It's something about it was because I don't typically see movies that don't interest me. Mm-hmm. And, I'm really glad I saw it. It was very good.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by your grade at all. I mean, it was a very well done movie.
Now I'm fine with that.
I mean, one of my issues, I do have to say, and I know it was the title of the book, but just the title giving the entire movie away, kind of stuck in my craw a little bit.
I would like to offer a brief counterpoint to that, though. Yes, it does give a little bit away. However, the Lone Survivor aspect of it only takes up about the first half of the film. The last half of the film is basically his journey to be saved. It's not really...
You mean the other characters died earlier?
Yes.
But, despite that, despite it losing a little bit of suspense factor because you already kind of know what's happening, Berg really did do a good job bringing you in with this you are there kind of a feel.
And I don't think it was really supposed to be designed as purely an action movie. It was really a drama. And I think it was about that one man's journey to kind of survive despite all odds, despite everything that happened to him. And the bonds that were created were ultimately destroyed. But in a way, that's also what helped keep him alive.
Okay.
Yeah,
I totally agree. I just could have used for a subtler title.
I could have too, and I think to be honest, that's one of the reasons I wasn't interested in seeing it. Well, okay, I know how this is going to end.
Right. All right, next up is Grudge Match. This is all but gone from major theaters, but hopefully you'll be able to see it soon in the bargain theaters. Kind of came and went, but we didn't get a chance to review it at the end of last year, so let's hear about Grudge Match.
Grudge Match, a sports comedy film starring Robert De Niro and Sylvester Stallone as Henry Razor Sharp and Billy the Kid McDonough, respectively. This film is something of a spoof on both actors' careers, with Stallone being the star of the successful Rocky series, and De Niro having starred in the legendary Scorsese picture, Raging Bull. This is also the first time the two have co-starred together since 1997's Copland. Sharp and Kid are two aging boxers who have held a rivalry for 30 years, after Sharp backed out of a fight that would have solidified one of them as the champs of their division. However, when the son of an old friend, a sports agent played by Kevin Hart, comes to Sharp with an offer, he takes him up on it due to financial difficulties. When Sharp and Kid cross paths, it leads to a media circus which ultimately continues, the two rivals facing each other after 30 years. Things are further complicated due to some drama connected to a fight many years before. Apparently, Kid had sexual relations with Sharp's girlfriend, played by Kim Basinger, leading her to have Kid's son, played by John Bernthal of Walking Dead fame. There is one word that basically describes the whole movie for me. Weak.
Fitting description.
I told you I had one word, Justin. The story is pretty by-the-numbers cliche and doesn't do much to hide this. Some of the writing was pretty weak as well. Basically, as the characters needed to change, they did so almost immediately. Even the ending seemed to just come out of nowhere. Most of the jokes aren't particularly clever, and the characters are mostly unlikable. I also felt that most of the actors just weren't putting any energy into their lines. It's true the dialogue wasn't great, but I've seen people do more with less. I feel both actors and the director, Peter Siegel, fell flat. Alan Arkin, who I usually love, was my least favorite part of the film. Robert De Niro was probably phoning it in as well. Sorry. However, the movie does have an almost hidden charm to it. I did chuckle a few times, though I never laughed out loud. I did feel that Basinger and Bernthal's performances were decent, and Stallone's charm made him easily the most likable character. The movie wasn't terrible by any means, but doesn't give much to write home about. If you are a fan of boxing movie comedies and you like Sylvester Stallone, I'd say go to Redbox and rent it, but you'll probably never watch it again. Might be being a little bit gracious here, but I'm going to give Grudge Match a C-.
Well, I don't think you're being all that gracious.
Not at all, actually.
For me, in the matter of Rocky versus Raging Bull, 30 years after the fact, the match is a bit of a draw. I thought it had funny moments, largely due for me to Kevin Hart and a little bit to Sylvester Stallone. I agree that Alan Arkin was
terrible.
It was.
I don't know why.
I'm over the shtick. He's been playing the same role now in the last 4 or 5 movies.
I'm just gonna be that annoying, smartass old guy.
But I thought the plot had a couple of surprises that pay off. We don't really learn anything about his son in the previews. I thought that was, an interesting kind of twist, the estranged son. Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right. I thought Barenthal did a really good job. I don't watch Walking Dead, so I was familiar with his name, but I didn't know.
You probably remember him from Wolf of Wall Street.
Snitch.
Oh, Beard. Snitch. That's what I remember him from. He was in the Wolf of Wall Street, too. Mm-hmm. You're right.
The drug dealer.
Yeah. The whole movie, it's far from horrible, but you can see definitely how it got lost in the holiday shuffle with a lot of other movies out there.
It's done better than some.
But it has done better than some, one of which we'll talk about momentarily. But I actually give Grudge Match a solid C.
Wow.
I didn't think you were being generous.
All right.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure.
C- is a fair grade, I think, for this movie.
But C range was all right.
Yeah. Justin, what do you think of Grudge Match?
Grudge Match is a film that ultimately felt like 3 movies in one. None of them necessarily bad, just underdeveloped. The first is a drama about 2 has-been boxers struggling with life after being famous, which I personally thought was the most interesting of the 3, but we'll come back to that. The second being about a sort of satirical look at rivalries being overhyped in sports media, which is aided by the one man that I find consistently unfunny, Kevin Hart, and the third essentially being a Rocky parody.
Oh, Justin, before you continue, I want to make a little note of something. This is actually the first time I ever saw Kevin Hart in a movie, and I thought he was okay.
I mean, his lines made me laugh the most.
You say Arkin is like repeating the same stuff. This is Kevin Hart's like shtick over and over and over.
Yeah, but he's a stand-up comedian. That's his persona.
I don't know. I mean, obviously, I know I'm in the minority on this one, but I just don't think the man can do anything in terms of being funny, being an actor, just trying to do anything in terms of film whatsoever.
I honestly think Kevin Hart was at about the same level as everybody else. I didn't think he was great. I didn't think he was horrible. I thought he was okay.
It's going to be a rough first quarter for Justin because Kevin Hart's in about 5 movies that are coming out.
And I'm hoping that he can surprise me, to be honest with you.
He won't.
He won't, but I'm trying to remain optimistic.
Right.
I like surprises.
Go ahead.
But anyways, to get back on track, all 3 of these stories have moments of interest. But because so much time is devoted to telling each one, the film runs on entirely too long, and none of them really offer any real feeling of satisfaction. It's somewhat of a pity because the first story that I mentioned offers up an interesting plot twist that, had they developed, could have made the film more than just mere winter fluff. Instead, Grudge Match is reduced to being an average boxing comedy drama with jokes that have long since gone stale, and I give it a C.
Pretty fair grades all around, I think.
Yeah, we were pretty much the same point.
Yeah, it definitely isn't terrible.
No.
But it is a...
weak.
It's a watch for free on Comedy Central in 5 years, or
it's like I said,
Redbox
if you want to like see it once, put it on the background, it's all right. You know.
Yeah. All right, up next is 47 Ronin. And boy, talk about a movie that disappeared from theaters shortly after it came out at Christmas.
Yeah.
But
fast.
again, just like Grudge Match, hopefully you can see this one if you want to at some of the bargain theaters.
It'll probably come out
or
soon.
out very, very soon on DVD, I'm sure.
They'll push it out, yeah.
Justin?
Okay, so after Lord Asano, played by Min Tanaka, has been deceived by Lord Kira, played by Tadanobu Asano from Thor fame, and forced to commit seppuku, aka samurai suicide, his following samurai, including the former English slave Kai, played by Keanu Reeves, are left without a master and forced to become Ronin. Together they spend a year planning their revenge on how to kill Kira. This is the latest in a decades-long list of adaptations of the tale of the 47 Ronin, and I have no problem calling this the worst of the bunch. The concept is fantastic, and in the right hands, this could have been a great way to bring an American audience into it, but instead it feels bloated and obnoxious. Rather than keeping it a realistic samurai story, the director, Carl Eric Rinch, somehow deemed it necessary to add bizarre supernatural elements and creatures to the mesh. As a result, the film feels cartoonish and constantly dragging, even when the action finally hits in the end. Though the film's costumes and occasional visuals are decent, the 47 Ronin ultimately deserve better than this garbage, and I give it a D.
I literally, zoned out during your entire description. I tuned back in for your review, but this movie is so awful. I couldn't hear it described again. It's bad. It almost made my bottom 10 on last week's Best and Worst of the Year show. And as I mentioned to Justin while we were actually watching the movie, I was sort of mentally making my list for the top 20 for said show, just because I was bored out of my mind in this movie. I can't give it my worst grade because visually it does look pretty great, and I thought some of the fight scenes were decent, but wow, it also gets a D from me. Joe?
I guess I have a different view on this one. I'm going to admit it's certainly no masterpiece. That much is for sure. But as I'm sure you both know, I love great atmosphere. And this movie had some stunning visuals.
Mm-hmm.
I really got sucked into the visuals. I loved the costumes. I loved some of the cinematography. I thought was legitimately good. And I thought it set a pretty good tone. I thought that some of the introductions to the bare bones of Japanese history was a little cheesy, like the beginning effects. But then again, to somebody that doesn't know anything about it, I thought it explained some basic things. And I don't know if you guys know this, but this movie was kind of a who's who of Japanese actors. Like, there were a lot of big names there. There really were. There were a lot of, honestly, pretty decent Japanese actors in there. Were they given much to do? Was the dialogue that great? No. I thought there were some pretty decent performances for what little they had. I mean, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but I've seen some of these guys, and they were doing okay.
I mean, I keep up with Japanese cinema a little bit more than most.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you have a little bit of a point. Like I mentioned, some people might recognize Asano from Thor, playing one of Thor's buddies. Mm-hmm. But honestly, there weren't that many that I could recognize. And to be honest with you, I'm kind of glad that there weren't that many that I could.
Oh, I thought there were. I mean, there are a couple. I can't name some of them, but I've seen a lot of these guys, and it was kind of good to see them in a movie about samurai and trying to do this great classic story, even if it was a really bizarre interpretation. Daniel, you want to say something?
Yeah, I don't follow Japanese cinema, so I didn't know any of the actors. But I guess my counter to that, movie 43, I mean, talk about a who's who of American actors, and it was just a turd.
Yeah, that's true.
So I can appreciate that there were a lot of Japanese actors in it doing what they do best.
Yeah.
But a great cast doesn't necessarily translate to a good movie.
No, it doesn't. But I thought it was cool to see a lot of those guys. And I don't know. It looked to me like kind of a dumb, fun action movie. And I know some people that thought it looked cool and thought it was all right. And I guess I went into it with a slightly different perspective. Yeah, some of it was boring. It was really cliche. But I didn't think it was that bad, and I gave 47 Ronin a C-. All
right. It's fair. And I mean, you're definitely more into that stuff than I am, for sure.
I was going to say, I mean, I love that stuff, and I'll be honest, as you guys know, I love anime, and I love samurai anime, and this felt like a cheesy samurai anime, and I kind of like that stuff.
What'd you think of Keanu Reeves, though?
I don't know.
Because he's so horrible and everything, it's hard to tell what to...
Okay, this is what I'll say about Keanu Reeves. I think he was kind of bad in it, but I do think he was actually trying. I guess one reason I think my grade is a little higher is because I went in with zero expectations. I thought this movie was going to be an F, honestly. Mm-hmm. And I actually thought it was mildly entertaining. I liked it probably about the same as I liked Grudge Match.
All right, good.
So,
I'm glad.
It was all right.
Well, up next we have Paranormal Activity, The Marked Ones. After an extremely disappointing Paranormal Activity 4, the franchise takes a bit of a break from the full-on series, which will receive a 5th installment later this year. But in the meantime, this offshoot takes place in California in 2012 in a Latino community and involves recent high school graduate Jesse, played by Andrew Jacobs, gaining superhuman powers like strength and the ability to speak to and get answers from a children's Simon toy, after his strange neighbor Anna, who was possibly a witch, gets killed. Jesse and his friends sneak into Anna's house and discover some very curious things all over the place. Now, I'm not exactly sure what separates this enough from the other paranormal films to have it stand under a different moniker. It still uses the found footage technique, and though it can stand on its own as a separate film, events and locations from the other films, especially the first 3, are alluded to and then some. But semantics aside, this movie just wasn't all that scary. Using a different family and setting was nice, But until it got to the last 20 minutes or so, when it really starts to piece things together from some of the other films, it isn't much more than a standard second or third tier horror film. I'm not necessarily tired of the found footage thing, but it has to come logically, and there were several times in the film I found myself wondering, with everything that's happening, why is this person still holding the camera? And stuff like that really took me out of the action. I have higher hopes, slightly, for Paranormal Activity 5 coming this fall, especially now that a couple more pieces of the story have fallen into place. But for the marked ones, it is a C- for me. Justin, what'd you think?
This is the second unofficial attempt, first official attempt at doing an ethnic spin-off to the Paranormal Activity franchise. The first was a now non-canon film in 2010 called Paranormal Activity 2 Tokyo Night, and it's still not heading in the right direction. The series is starting to do what the Saw franchise did by being somewhat of an annual horror mystery, and is starting to suffer in a number of the same ways. The characters are weak, and while the film does offer more information in regards to the overall mystery, something I kind of wish Paranormal Activity 4 had done, it also manages to pose even more questions than we originally had, and possibly creates a few plot holes. It's a slight improvement over the pitiful last installment, but it's only by a slight margin, and like Dan, I really do hope that the fifth film attempts to wrap things up or get the series close to it. Paranormal Activity, the marked ones, gets a D+.
What's your favorite of the series? Because I don't think you like this series nearly as much as I do.
That's a good question, actually. I would probably say part 1.
And around what range was that?
I'd say B+, A-.
Okay. Because I gave the third one an A. I thought the third one was the best. It was by far the scariest.
I've heard 1 and 3 are the best ones.
Yeah, I mean, the first one is the second best. It's certainly the most original because it started it all. And I'd probably give that, like around an A- B+ kind of range.
I've heard good things about the first one.
But the fourth one is really awful.
What about the second one?
The
No one talks about the
The second one's kind of more of the same.
Yeah.
I actually consider it the most entertaining of the bunch. I've seen it at least like 3 to 4 times.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
But it's just more...
It's just different. Yeah, it doesn't differentiate itself much from the first one.
Yeah.
Whereas the third one really does, and then that's when it starts to tie in. I mean, I guess the second one tied into the first one, but I still don't understand though why this is considered an offshoot when I thought it tied more in with the other movies than 4 ever did.
I completely agree.
So Joe, you didn't get to see that, did you? Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah. Well, this is my first experience with Paranormal Activity. I've never seen any of them. I think the thing that stands out the most to me, just in terms of negatives, honestly, is that it's supposed to be taking place in this ethnic community, but I'm pretty sure the people that wrote this movie aren't Hispanic. It didn't really sell that for me. I just some of these, I don't know if it was the acting or just some of the dialogue, I'm like, I'm pretty sure nobody says that.
And they kept making, quote-unquote Latino references.
Yeah,
it's like when you watch that 70s show and they talk and they purposely throw in a 70s reference for humor.
Exactly.
It's like they kept talking about how they want tortillas and it was
that one scene where it's man, I don't have any chips, all I got is a tortilla. Wow, this is borderline racist.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm
yeah, I'll second that.
There's a Taco Bell reference at one point.
The good news is that's probably the worst thing I have to say about it. Basically, that leads into the whole concept of this movie just kind of being a bit cheesy. It deals in with the whole found footage cliche thing, But, hey, sometimes it works really well. Sometimes you can utilize that to create a really awesome film. I don't think this was the best example of that, but I feel like there's worse out there. I thought the acting was honestly okay. The characters were a little on the weak side, but I still found them kind of likable. I didn't mind watching them. They entertained me. So I guess I would say overall for this film, it was better than I expected it to be. I think the reason I'm not going to give it a particularly low grade, though, is because you guys said it wasn't very scary. I, for the most part, agree. But there were a couple scenes where I was legitimately getting chills. And I had to give it some credit for that because I wasn't really expecting it. There were a couple scenes that really surprised me. And I like that. I mean, it mostly failed to be scary. But if it's going for that and got a few decent ones out of me, I'm like, that's not bad. Cheesy and cliche, but it was alright. I give Paranormal Activity, the marked ones, a C.
Yeah, I don't think the acting is necessarily bad in these movies. I actually respect that they get complete unknowns to do it, because it does make the found footage concept a little bit more
like if it's somebody you don't recognize,
yeah,
amateur guy off the street.
Found footage and
With
Bradley
Brad Pitt.
Cooper is coming up, or Brad Pitt. It's like,
well,
that took me right out of the movie, you know. But I will say that all of these movies employ complete no-name actors.
No, I thought that if that's the case, they're amateurs. They did fine.
Yeah.
I was fine with it.
All right, now we've got Oscar hopeful Her. And as we discussed at the top of the show, Spike Jonze just won a Golden Globe for Best Screenplay for this film. Justin, tell us about Her.
Theodore Twombly, played by Joaquin Phoenix, is a man still haunted from his failed marriage a year prior to his wife, Catherine, played by Rooney Mara. However, when he purchases an operating system with an artificial intelligence who calls herself Samantha, voiced by Scarlett Johansson, to get his life back on track, the two begin to make a connection and take their relationship to a new level. There's quite a bit that can be said about director Spike Jonze, but two things can definitely be agreed upon. He never offers the same experience twice, and he always offers up something original to his audiences. Whether or not this is a good thing is completely dependent on the viewer, but Her is no exception to these points, and I would happily argue it's quite possibly his best yet. Her is a story all about connections and learning to feel through a completely unique love story. It's occasionally awkward and even a little bit uncomfortable at points, quite a bit like falling in love, but as Samantha says early on in the film, you'll get used to it. Johansson is fantastic in her role as Samantha, and while she may only be a voice for the entire film, the audience never feels closer to her, giving many a memorable moment in the film. Her was a pleasure to watch, and I give it an A that I may very well push up to an A+ before the second round of our top 20 a few shows from now.
For me, Her is the kind of story that is so out there and bizarre and new. Like you said, Spike Jonze never offers up, anything that he's done before, or that anyone has done before, for that matter, that you either buy into it or you don't. And if you don't, you're just simply not going to enjoy the movie very much. It took me a while, probably about half the film, before I really started buying into it. Once I did, it definitely got more interesting for me, but at that point I just wasn't quite connected with the characters, so I tried, but still couldn't go very far with it. Now, Spike Jonze is the master of creating entire new worlds, as he did in one of my favorite recent family films, Where the Wild Things Are, and while that was adapted from a very thin book, Her is entirely his creation, and it's also his first stab at solo screenwriting, but it shows. There are some elements missing from this film in the world that he created. For example, Theodore's job is writing other people's love letters, but it's never explained what this service really is. Do the people he's writing to know that the person writing the letter isn't actually their beloved, but a sad, lonely man in a cubicle? Like a lot of things in the movie, it was an interesting concept, but not fully fleshed out. I would be curious to see if a rewatch of the film would make me feel differently about it, since it took me about half the film to really buy into it. Now, clearly, I'm in the minority critically, with tons of award buzz and a 93% currently on Rotten Tomatoes, but audiences are very divided about it, and you can count me among them, and I give Her, on its initial run here, a B-. Joe?
I think that I went into this one with an open mind. I'm pretty much probably going to echo Justin, because I think he put it quite beautifully, and I think he covered most of the points I'd probably cover. Spike Jonze, as you guys both mentioned, does a really good job of creating these brand new worlds, and I think he really did an excellent job of kind of helping me get sucked into it, as I said before. And I think that is lended to amazing cinematography, and I thought Joaquin Phoenix, who is not really my favorite actor, I've seen one or two things with him I thought I liked, but other than that, I mean, this was a great performance from him.
It's probably my favorite from him.
It's probably his best, yeah, and he really sold it for me, and I think that Spike Jonze, at the very least, was able to create a very believable character who is flawed and therefore very human. And for me, I thought that was quite amazing. And I thought the film itself kind of had a slightly dystopian, near-future, almost sci-fi feel, which I kind of liked. It was very light, but just enough to kind of make it quirky, but not bombard it. It had that light little touch of magic that I think is kind of accompanied with all his films. Just a little bit out there. And yes, some people buy into it, some people won't. But at the very least, he's unique. And I really liked the message. I really liked the story. I thought that it was focusing on this really, really poignant idea about human connection and experience and growth and sharing your memories with someone else. And I thought there was an interesting little subplot, kind of this underlying theme about how her, Samantha, is becoming her own person. And she kind of makes a comment in the movie at some point about how what it would be like to actually have physical form, and how to her that really doesn't mean anything, but it's almost like she's living vicariously through Twombly. So it's almost like, despite her not being able to fully connect with him based on their experiences, they do manage to forge something that's really real. And I think that was a very powerful message that's really important. Plus, I thought it was a good commentary on just how people are losing connection with bombardment of technology and whatnot. I mean, I thought that was clearly obvious in the movie.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
I thought that was very important. So whether it's overt or whether it's subtle, I think there was a lot going on. I think it was fantastic. And yes, it was ambitious, but I think for the most part, he really did an excellent job with the screenplay. There were little things that could have expanded on. Yes, I kind of wondered the same thing. What exactly is his job? It seems kind of beautiful and depressing at the same time, but his job was basically forging connections with people who weren't very good at connecting themselves, and kind of reflecting his own lack of ability to form relationships, to take risks, to live his life. Basically, that's what the movie was about. So he's living vicariously. The whole movie is about living vicariously,
Sure.
and that's kind of one thing his job is about. He has this ability to write really well, but he's not really doing it for himself. And these people aren't connecting, so it's like, hey, could you write a letter, to this person? I don't really want to take the time to do it. I'll just have somebody else do it for me.
But I think it's sort of like making a natural connection through the unnatural.
Exactly. And that's, of course, the technology and, angle. That's one thing the movie was going for. I can understand some people not liking it. It is kind of bizarre, and some parts were kind of uncomfortable, even for me. But I think that was the point. I think some things were supposed to be uncomfortable. But I was pretty much sold. I'm not going to lie. I got teary at one point in the movie. I mean,
I did too.
It affected me. It made me cry. I mean, it did. And if a movie can do that, it did something right. I was very tempted to give it an A+. The only reason I didn't give it that grade is because I did feel that the movie could have ended a couple points, and it was a bit long for me. But a rewatch could change that. So for right now, I'm going to give her an A.
I would like to echo your point that it did seem like it was going to end at a couple points. My problem was I started coming up with ideas on how it was going to end, and by the actual finale, it completely threw all mine to the wayside. And I actually really respected the way they chose to wrap it up.
I think it worked. I just feel like Spike Jonze wasn't entirely sure how he was going to end his story, and so he left a kind of couple cuts for his drafters, because it seemed like there were a couple possible endings there, and he could have skipped one or two of them.
You know what's funny? I actually was completely fine with the way it was ended, in the style that, maybe it could have ended a couple times. And maybe that's because mentally I didn't really show up till about halfway through the movie.
Maybe.
It could have been.
That I was like invested in these characters, and then it was over.
At what point did you start to get invested, actually?
To be honest, it was when Theodore and his ex-wife met for lunch. And he told her about Samantha.
Well, let me ask you a question.
Point.
This, I think, is the dividing point for this movie. Did you think of Samantha as an actual character?
I knew that...
In the story she's supposed to be.
Right. I knew that in the story she was supposed to be, but no, I didn't. And that's why I said in my review that you either get on board with it or you don't. I think it took me a long time to get on board with it.
I think whether you love or hate this movie or like it or
dislike it, I would absolutely agree with that.
Can you accept this person as a person, or is she just a means for this other person to kind of explore himself? Either way, that's what he's trying to do.
Yeah.
But whether or not she is a person will heavily impact how you view it. Some people will be able to buy into it, some people won't.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely don't see it entering my top 20 come Oscar season, like probably with you gentlemen. But like I said, I really am curious to watch it again and to see if viewing it from a slightly different perspective alters my opinion on it.
There's so much going on. I think that you really could watch the movie a couple times and get something new out of it every time.
I don't think Spike Jonze has made a movie that couldn't benefit from a second viewing.
To be honest, that's the way it is with a lot of his films. Most of them, you watch them the first time, and people are divided. Some people don't get it. But you go back, you try to open your mind, look at it, you might enjoy it more.
All right, well, finally, in our new releases, we have the Home Media Moment, and these are recently released films on DVD and on demand that we have not gotten to review yet for the show, and this one is Ain't Them Bodies Saints, and Justin's going to tell us about that.
Okay, after outlaw Bob Muldoon, played by Casey Affleck, takes the blame for his wife, Ruth, played by Rooney Mara again, near killing of a police officer, he's given a long sentence and is sent to prison. However, years later, as Ruth struggles to adapt to a normal life away from crime with a daughter that she's been bringing up since Muldoon's sentence, she discovers that Bob has escaped from prison, and whether or not he may be coming back for her starts to come into question. Ain't Them Bodies Saints is a film that benefits largely from its handling of the overall dilemmas of the film through its characters. Both Affleck and Mara play people that may be either looking for redemption from their past or return to it. It becomes an argument that can be argued both ways, and how the film implements flashbacks to shed more light on the characters furthers its complexity. The film resembles a sort of neo-western with its structuring, the action taking place near the beginning and the end of the film, and takes its time, while never feeling boring, thanks in part to a number of great characters and a compelling story. My only real issues with this film stem from feeling that an extra 10 to 15 minutes to flesh things out, notably with some of the side characters, would have really made all the difference. Overall, Ain't Them Bodies Saints is a film that I can well recommend, and I give it a B+.
Joe, what'd you think?
I'm going to let you go first, Dan.
Okay, great.
I'm actually kind of curious what you think first.
God. I feel like the curmudgeon of this episode. The pacing of the movie, for me, was the biggest problem. It almost reminded me of a Malick type, and for those regular listeners of the podcast, I don't really care for Terrence Malick.
That kind of throws me. Could you give me an example? I don't know.
There were just some slow, lumbering scenes and shots that
they weren't that artsy though, were they?
I don't agree at all. I thought they were
slow, but it reminded me more of Shame director. Help me out, Justin.
Steve McQueen.
Steve McQueen. Yeah, it reminded me a little more of his style. Not quite as elaborate as Malick.
Yeah, no, I could see it. I mean, obviously, it's a more cohesive storytelling than Malick does. Mm-hmm. I found some of the shots to be sort of Malick-esque in their
just
slow nature, I guess.
Just
just the pacing of the movie just wasn't great for me.
Gotcha.
The acting from the two leads is pretty good, most notably from Rooney Mara.
Come on, Casey, guys.
But
give him some
Casey
love.
Affleck was all right. I mean,
I actually thought he was pretty decent in this. I wouldn't say it's anything worth writing home about, but I thought he did a good job.
I thought he was all right.
Yeah, I thought he was okay. I mean, it wasn't bad. He didn't detract from the story.
Please continue. That.
But I didn't think the supporting cast was all that much to write home about, other than, Rooney Mara and Casey Affleck. The basic plot, though little more than a souped-up version of the Star-Crossed Lovers bit, is pretty interesting. It was a new little twist on it. But overall, here's another one I just was kind of bored with. It was okay, and not much more than that. I give it a C+.
Oh. Well, this is interesting. I wanted you guys to go first because I really didn't know what either you were thinking about it.
Okay.
What
do you think about it?
Well, that's what I want to say. I'm kind of in the middle, actually. My review for this is very short. I think the thing that really stood out for me the most about this particular film are the performances. I thought the two main leads were very good. I really thought they held this together. And I also felt the plot, Justin pointed this out before I saw that it was kind of a neo-western, and I can kind of see that. So I did sort of like that format. I thought the plot was interesting. I liked the twists. I liked the unique aspect of it. I think I loved the music. I thought the music really set the tone, and it really just took me to a different place. I just kind of liked that. It really invested kind of that western feel that I kind of enjoy. But in terms of pacing, it moved really slowly for me, particularly towards the middle. And I didn't feel completely invested in most of the characters. And maybe that has something to do with the time, the lack of time for the film. You could put an extra 10, 15 minutes to flesh them out. But that was kind of rough for me personally. Though I did, interestingly enough, find the beginning kind of to be a good hook. And I thought that it really picked up towards the end. Like the last 20 minutes or so of the film, I really, really liked. So I did really get a lot of enjoyment out of it towards the final act. Overall, though, it's a very mixed bag for me. I give Ain't Them Bodies Saints B-.
Okay.
Wow.
Kind of on the same page. I really did think it was very slow. I completely agree.
It really didn't bother me that much. Admittedly, I was kind of multitasking while watching it. But, I mean, while I was doing that, my eyes were always focused on the screen, trying to figure out what was going to happen next. And it really never detracted from me. But, I mean, I can see where you guys are coming from with that.
I think if you're focusing completely on the film, it might be a little harder to get into.
All right, well, that was our home media moment. Now let's get into our top 5. And this week's top 5 was thought up by Justin. We actually didn't discuss what our triple features are going to be yet, and our top 5 sort of plays into that. Our new classic this week is The Great Gatsby, so we're going to be talking about that momentarily. And old classic was chosen by me. This is Guilty Pleasure Month for the start of Season 2 here, so each of us are going to pick one of our Guilty Pleasure movies, and I was up first and picked The Secret of My Success. And then our Oscar A to Z nominee, it was Airport from 1970. So, sort of keying off of The Great Gatsby and The Secret of My Success, this week's top 5 is Rags to Riches movies. And this was a theme suggested by Justin, so I'm going to let you go first.
All right, number 5, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. As much as I was not a fan of Tim Burton's disturbing adaptation of the material, I have to say both versions did one thing very well, depicting Charlie's hardships. However, I feel like the 1973 version did it so much better, with the character literally being one of the few people in the family even trying to get beyond their meager lifestyle. Trying to get a lifetime supply of chocolate, as Willie seems to suggest.
Doesn't get much better than that.
It doesn't. I wouldn't necessarily call that riches, but...
I mean, to some people, chocolate is a great wealth. I mean, heck, I could do for some myself.
For a kid, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Number 4, Steve Martin's The Jerk. Luck has always been an important part of a rags to riches story, but some are significantly more so than others. Steve Martin's character, Navin, has everything thrust upon him, and it truly feels like a lucky break. However, rags to riches movies still need some degree of structure than relying solely on mere luck, which is why The Jerk ends up so low on this list. That's not to say that Navin's antics are any less amusing, just not the best material for a rags to riches movie list. Number 3, a movie I believe Dan really likes a lot, and that is The Pursuit of Happiness.
Love it.
With a Y.
With a Y. This is a great rags to riches story in terms of just simply tackling the subject matter of getting back up after taking a massive financial drop into a rags-like lifestyle. Will Smith narrates the film in chapters of not only Chris Gardner's journey to recovery, but also managing to be a father to his son, Christopher, played by Will Smith's actual son in probably his only decent actual film performance.
He was good in The Karate Kid.
I thought it was okay.
All right.
Didn't see it, never will.
It's not a... You're not missing anything. It's not only a great story, but really highlights Will Smith's acting chops as a serious actor, and that truly earns a number 3 spot. My number 2 is one that we talked about briefly in season 1, and that was Cinderella Man.
Ooh.
Along the same theme of recovery back from rags, Cinderella Man explores this within the lifestyles of the Great Depression. This was a period in time when talent would not pass off as a means to get by, but rather depending on others in the process, a concept hit home multiple times in the film. As such, Russell Crowe's performance as James Braddock, struggling during the Depression, ends up almost as enticing, if not even more so, than his return to riches as a boxer.
You really like that movie, don't you?
It's really an underrated Ron Howard film, I'm not going to lie.
It just, you brought that one up a couple times, and I do think it's a good movie, but man, you really do like that one.
He's into it.
He is. It's a good picture.
All right, Joe, what about your 5 through 2?
Oh, my 5 through 2. My number 5 is 1968's Oliver. Oliver Twist is honestly one of the great classic rags to riches stories. I love the novel. I love many versions of the film, but I think this one is kind of really dear to my heart because I watched a lot as a kid. I love the songs. I think it's a great musical. I mean, the music performances in general just were set design for the time, and just the melodies themselves are great. I thought the acting was memorable, and hey, it's a classic story, and there's really not much more to say about that. I mean, it's Oliver. Number 4 is one that you guys might be surprised about, and that's Forrest Gump. I mean, Tom Hanks in a classic role. It's a lovable main character, and it's a fun story, and it's one for the family just to gather around and enjoy, and you can really get a lot out of it. It's got a lot of rewatchability, and I actually do like it. Some people don't seem to think I do, but
You put it on
You're the
your,
one. Yeah, you're the one that said it on the podcast.
questionable Oscar decision.
I still don't think it was worthy of being Best Picture, but I still think it's a good movie. Just because I don't think that it's the greatest doesn't mean that I automatically think it's the worst. I mean, it's not that much of a coin thing, man. Come on, give me a break. But yes, Forrest Gump, number 4, good movie. Number 3 is Slumdog Millionaire. I thought this movie had a great insight into class struggles, something we don't really see that much over here. And it really tells this majestic story, and there's a lot of atmosphere. Once again, I really like that. And it just got that heartfelt story, and that this character that you can just really get behind. It's so human, yet so magical. Just got a great balance, and Slumdog Millionaire is very comfortably at number 3. I'm actually happy that one won something, you know?
Yeah.
It's great. You know? It's
A deserving Best Picture.
oh, absolutely. It deserves Best Picture.
No question.
No question at all. Number 2 is one that Justin mentioned, and that is The Pursuit of Happiness with the Y. Echoing what Justin said, it's one of Will Smith's best roles. It's very believable, and it's very timely. I think it's something that a lot of people can relate to, and it's so human, and there's just something about it that really captures the struggle of just being down on your luck, but just fighting your way up to the top. There's really few films that I think can compare to it, especially in recent years. So, yeah, it was a good choice, Justin.
Yeah, good choice.
Mm-hmm.
All right, my number 5 is The People versus Larry Flint. This is such a good movie. I don't know if either of you have seen it.
Never.
I didn't think so, but it's one to check out. It's Woody Harrelson in his, can't say finest performance because you could just, name 6 that are all right up there. He is one of my favorite go-to actors, and he was fantastic as Larry Flint. And Courtney Love, surprisingly, was also really good in this movie. This is sort of when she had cleaned herself up and was doing the serious actress thing. But this got a lot of accolades when it came out, and all are deserved. It's a really, really good movie about a questionably good person. Is he good? Is he not good? Sort of up for debate, but the movie is great. Number 4 is Walk the Line. Now, I sort of debated whether or not to put this on or Ray. They're both sort of the rags to riches musical stories that came out around the same time.
You can't put Ray on. Jamie Foxx is in it.
I like Jamie Foxx, and I think he did a good job as Ray.
I would agree.
However, Joaquin Phoenix and Reese Witherspoon are on quite, not a whole other level, because Jamie Foxx was great, but Reese Witherspoon was very deserved as June Carter with her Oscar win for that.
Absolutely.
And Joaquin Phoenix, unfortunately, he did not win, but I thought his Johnny Cash was fantastic, and it really is a very, very good story. You know, Johnny Cash was a tortured soul, some of which he did to himself, and it's just a really, really neat story. And in both of those, number 4 and number 5, it's mostly about their adult lives when they're sort of already famous, but it does start out, as they're poor kids, and sort of gets to how they become rich. My number 3 is The Pursuit of Happiness. It's on my top 25 films of all time, so I could not leave it off of this list. For me, it is Will Smith's best performance, and I thought Jaden did a great job playing his son. And I don't know, just so many heartwarming moments in this movie amidst so many awful things happening to the character that it all really worked. My number 2 is Dreamgirls. Now, I wasn't quite positive if this was really a rags to riches. Justin assured me it was, because obviously the main part of the story is Jennifer Hudson, who sort of does not get rich with the rest of the gals, but certainly the Dreamgirls themselves get very wealthy and very famous, and as we know, I love this movie, so it's my number 2. Justin, what's your number 1?
My number 1 was one that was on Joe's list, and that would be Danny Boyle's Slumdog Millionaire. Great rags to riches stories are all about great underdogs, and Slumdog Millionaire is truly the cream of the crop. From the very beginning, Dev Patel as the protagonist Jamal has all the odds stacked wildly up against him, and his fight not for wealth but to be with the woman he loves is more than worth getting behind. As such, the Slumdog Millionaire gains riches well beyond mere fortune, and for that, Danny Boyle's Best Picture winner takes my number 1.
Good
Joe,
choice.
how about for you?
For me, it's something quite different from a lot of the other ones on my list, and that would be 1982's Trading Places. This is a very smart 80s comedy with a lot of great commentary on greed and excess in the 80s, but also with quite possibly one of the greatest casts really of the time. I mean, you've got Dan Aykroyd, you've got Eddie Murphy at his finest, you've got Jamie Lee Curtis in a good early role. You have a really fun story that's just really easy to get behind. It's very cleverly written, and it's honestly one of the best films of the time of the genre I've seen, and it is honestly a great rags to riches tale, and it also kind of does a swap, as the title implies, to kind of show the riches to rags, which is something that you don't really see that often.
That is true.
And I have to admit, that is something that really stood out to me. I love this movie, and admittedly, it's not quite coming to America, but being the fact that it is sort of a related film, it definitely takes the spot at my number one.
And of course, since he was already rich and coming to America, you couldn't put that on your list. But
Not at all.
You got to rep Eddie Murphy.
Yeah, you got to rep him somehow. And I mean, hey, he's got the rags to riches. You know?
Yeah, he certainly does. My number one is also Slumdog Millionaire. This is among the greatest movies made in the last decade. I don't think there's a frame wasted in the film. The characters are so fantastic. Specifically, the brother in the film. I don't think he gets talked about enough, but he is truly one of the most well-written, tragic characters in recent cinema. He just gives it all for his brother, and it's so touching and so good. And Justin pretty much hit all the right notes on that. It's just a fantastic movie, and I'm glad we all had it in our top 5.
Yeah, it's a good movie.
Yeah. All right, well, now we're going to move into our triple feature, and that includes our new classic, which is a movie that's come out in the last couple of years that we want to rewatch. The old classic, which, like I said, this week kicks off Guilty Pleasure Month with my choice, The Secret of My Success, and the 1970 Oscar-nominated and Oscar-winning movie, Airport. Joe, we're going to start with you and The Great Gatsby.
Let us delve into the great. Not the greatest, but The Great Gatsby. A Baz Luhrmann picture based on the 1925 American classic novel of the same name. Taking place in the Roaring '20s in a small village outside of New York City, the tale is recounted by Nick Carraway, played by Tobey Maguire. Carraway tells us the story of his meeting with his neighbor, the mysterious man named Gatsby, played by Leonardo DiCaprio. Upon meeting the charming man, the two strike up a friendship. However, there is an ulterior motive. Gatsby enlists Nick's help in arranging the meeting with Nick's cousin, Daisy, played by Carey Mulligan. It turns out that Gatsby and Daisy had a romance many years before, but due to a variety of events, the two grew apart. Though the relationship still has a strong flame, things are rather complicated. Since Daisy is now married to a less than likable fellow named Tom, played by Joel Edgerton, throw in an affair Tom has on the side as well as the shady dealings behind Gatsby's fortune, it is the epitome of drama. A series of causes and effects leads to a heated climax in a manner which mostly stays true to the original story. I have mixed feelings about this film. I'm not really a Baz Luhrmann fan. I've made that point pretty clear. I can understand how the stylized nature of his movies could work for some. His films are big, bright, and grand, but I often feel that they're somewhat cartoony and overly lavish. Despite this, I did like some of the cool effects in the editing that was used, like Nick's words from his journal overlapping with the events described. I thought that was pretty cool. I do approve of the heavy atmosphere. Once again, I've been bringing up a lot of that this podcast, but it's a strong point for me, particularly with the costumes, the sets, and the cinematography, and one or two of the music numbers. Although most of the hip-hop numbers were both distracting and annoying to me personally. I also thought the performances were good, primarily from Tobey Maguire. I felt his voice was perfect for the narration. Yes, it probably could have been anyone, but I thought he did well in any case. I think the main reason I don't like this movie is very much the same reason I don't like the novel that much. The things I like best about both is the fact that the descriptions paint a grand picture of the pulse of 1920s New York culture. However, I just don't like the plot. I feel that nothing really happens outside of Carraway's observations, limiting our perspective on what's actually happening. Therefore, I don't really feel that I can connect with Daisy or Gatsby or really anyone else. I'm interested in them, but I don't feel that we ever really get to know them. At the end of the day, despite their humanity, I feel like it's just rich people with rich people problems. This is not to say that Baz doesn't do a good job of bringing this to the screen. He did. It's just that he doesn't have much to work with. Neither do the actors. Still, it is a beautiful film, and there are really a few great memorable scenes and pieces of dialogue. Some may love it, but this is not for me. I give Great Gatsby a B minus.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the big dividing movies of 2013. There's a few in the mix. Oz the Great and Powerful is certainly one. World War Z is certainly one. But maybe the biggest of all is Gatsby. Personally, for me, I loved it. Now, I hated the book as well. I thought it was boring. I couldn't get into it. I remember reading it in high school, and I couldn't remember whether I liked it or not. So I reread it before the movie came out, and it was like tough to get through, and I was super excited for the movie, and then I read the book and I was like, well, now I don't know how I'm going to feel about it. I thought the movie was quite the opposite. I did identify with Gatsby's character. I know you said you had a little trouble sort of finding the appeal, rich people with rich people problems, which I do agree with, but of course, because Gatsby's story started out with the rags part, as we sort of learn piece by piece throughout the movie, I did sort of identify with him. Baz Luhrmann really brought the book out in such a way that made it pretty and fascinating and riveting. The acting is superb, and I agree, Tobey Maguire was the best part of the movie. I'm a huge Leo fan, obviously, and I thought he was great as Gatsby, but Tobey Maguire really made the story pop.
I'd agree with that.
I think more than anything else. My only real problem with this movie is the soundtrack. Now, I don't mind it in scenes when there's like a huge lavish party, everybody's dancing. Makes sense. Obviously, they wouldn't be listening to hip-hop in the 1920s, but,
there were one or two scenes. I think there was a scene in the room where he's just getting drunk for the first time, and I guess the beginning of his alcoholism, which is a problem later.
Mm-hmm.
There was a song I thought that was fairly appropriate for that. It didn't really distract me that much, but I think there was one where they're just driving, and they drive...
That was what I was going to point out. For me, that's the one that really is the most glaring. They're driving on the bridge.
They drive by some black people in a car, and then it's like...
And they're blasting Jay-Z.
I'm like, really?
And it was very bizarre, and that really... that took me out of it. Didn't care for that. To be honest, I'm not a huge Luhrmann fan. Romeo and Juliet is pretty decent. Moulin Rouge, I hate. So I'm sort of hit or miss. For me, this is his crowning achievement. I really liked it. This was my third time watching it, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing it again at some point. I leave The Great Gatsby with an A-. Justin?
Director Baz Luhrmann is a director lost in his own filmmaking style, and that's part of the problem with this adaptation of the F. Scott Fitzgerald novel. There's a point with an adaptation when a filmmaker needs to understand that some elements key to their own craft will not translate to the material that they are putting on the screen. Needless to say, Luhrmann did not get this message, and as a result, the first half hour of this film feels obnoxious and even possibly offensive, particularly as you both mentioned with the insertion of pop culture music. However, once Leonardo DiCaprio shows up as the titular Gatsby, the film slows down Luhrmann's awkward technique, allowing other aspects to shine, such as the gorgeous, albeit arguably over-the-top visuals, and a couple good performances, notably Carey Mulligan as Daisy, Elizabeth Debicki, who I really wish we had seen more of, and Tobey Maguire didn't do it for me, but I'm glad you guys enjoyed his performance. But overall, The Great Gatsby is a decent film held back by its director, which really becomes a pity given how much this truly had going for it, and for that, I give it a B-.
Most of the music stuff didn't come until we met Gatsby anyway, though.
Yeah, that's when it was the most noticeable.
I mean, there's one scene where Nick goes to that apartment where they're kind of having like a swinger party.
That's actually one of the few I liked.
But yeah, I mean, it wasn't really hip hoppy. It was very trumpety and very. It was very jazzy.
It was very jazzy. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I guess it was modernist jazz, but
kind of
like it was still split with a kind of dubstep thing, though.
That didn't bother me as much as the clearly, obviously hip-hop stuff. I mean, that really takes you out.
Oh, don't get me wrong. There are worse instances later, but that one I was still unhappy about, but I wasn't as bothered as other parts.
Mm-hmm. Is that the part that you think is offensive about the first half hour?
I think it's that alongside the fact that it literally felt like he was pretty much taking his entire style and trying to bleed it onto something that didn't need it. I know you two weren't exactly happy with the novel. I was actually okay with it. I'm not saying that we needed a straightforward adaptation. All I'm saying is I think he should have at least respected the material more than just...
This was a pretty straightforward adaptation.
It followed the book pretty closely.
It followed the book very well.
Hence why I didn't like it that much.
No, my issue is I think there's a point where you need to understand that it needs to follow the book without necessarily being, okay, now implement your style, which for Baz just... whichever.
Justin, I would kind of counter with that point. It almost sounds like you're saying just bring it to life, but in the most bland way possible. Like every director has a style.
No, not necessarily that. It's just there's a point where something that sounds good on paper doesn't necessarily mean it's good in execution.
Other than the hip-hop stuff, what do you think was not respecting the material? Because it really was quite faithful to the book.
The obnoxious fast cuts, the ridiculous zooms, the fact that he's trying to play with... Some of the words things I was okay with. Other times I thought he was basically playing around with 3D a little too much.
You mean when he's writing...
And you see it on this... It's
like that part I was okay with.
Oh, okay.
The dancing words every 5 seconds just bothered me.
When he's... Yeah, but he's not... I mean, he doesn't write all that much in the movie.
It just kind of... I thought that was kind of cool because one of the nice things about the book is that descriptive nature. It's very simplistic, but it does a great way of painting that picture, like I said. And it's like he's kind of paying homage to, like, here are the words, and I'm trying to bring it to screen. I'm like...
which is fine, but I mean...
Which to me respects the book.
I thought at the very least he was trying to do his best. But I don't think he was trying
to...
I
don't think he was trying to trash it at all. And that's part of the problem. I kind of wish his respect had lent itself more to the screen. The problem is Baz can't be anybody but Baz. And because of that, it just feels bloated and obnoxious.
Hey, man, you're right. He does have a very strong style.
If he was going to do that, why not just set it in the modern day? The Great Gatsby would be perfect for that.
So you think that he let his own style run too rampant, basically?
Essentially, yes.
Well, I can kind of see that, and some directors are able to kind of tone down their own styles, but most directors don't. They have their signature things, and they run with it. I mean, it's like...
Which is fine, but for Baz, it's just so over the top and grandiose and obnoxious.
I think here's why I liked it. Because it's a book that lends itself to Baz Luhrmann's style. Gatsby is lavish and over the top, and he has these big, elaborate parties. To me, it's the perfect book for Baz Luhrmann to put his style on.
Which I was hoping would be the case for this, but it just wasn't. More often than most, I thought it was awkward. To be honest with you, when I saw it in the theater, until Leonardo DiCaprio showed up, I was getting ready to walk out. Because it just felt like...
but you also don't like the Tobey Maguire part of it. I was fine before
honestly,
Leo showed up.
I didn't hate his performance. I just thought it was average. It didn't bring anything new to the table. It just didn't do anything all that unique either.
Well, I'll be honest. I mean, I have issues with Tobey Maguire, but for me, he was my favorite part of that movie. That first half hour was my favorite. I liked Leo and all, but to me, once the actual plot started to get going, I slowly felt myself losing interest. Tobey Maguire, his perspective, the way he did Nick Carraway, who is kind of not the most reliable narrator anyway, made it interesting. I thought so. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're right. Maybe it wasn't the best performance, but I thought it worked well. It helped. Yeah. It kept me in. I don't know.
Well, like I said, certainly one of the more dividing features of 2013.
Yeah, even in the things that we agree on, we disagree on.
So we'll wrap it there. Now we're going to move on to our old classic and the start of Guilty Pleasure Month. I think we were all pretty excited about this, and we're each going to bring one of our guilty pleasures to the table. And we sort of defined guilty pleasures amongst ourselves as a movie that we can identify is probably not that great of a film, but that we enjoy. So it'll be interesting to see everybody's choices. My pick was The Secret of My Success. I had a lot to choose from. I didn't know which one I was going to do, but I went with this one, which actually neither of you had even heard of, which sort of surprised me a little bit.
Though, one person that comes occasionally, Alex, I actually brought it up to him. He knew what this movie was.
Oh, okay.
Surprisingly. And he actually thought it was kind of funny.
Oh, cool.
So I actually knew somebody that heard of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know many people that have heard of this. But, of course, I am a little bit older than you guys, so makes sense. It's from 1987. I didn't quite realize until I decided to run it how big of a hit it was. I thought it was sort of a hit in my family, and we all liked it.
Like it came out one weekend, had its point, and then left.
Exactly. But this movie was number one at the box office for 5 weeks, and it became the 7th biggest grossing movie of 1987.
That's incredible.
Quite the hit back in the day. Michael J. Fox plays Brantley Foster, a recent college grad from Kansas who moves to NYC with dreams of a life working in high finance. When he gets there, he finds out the job he thought he had is no longer open to him as the company has been taken over. After trying to gain employment elsewhere and having no luck, he hits up his estranged Uncle Howard, the CEO of the Pemrose Corporation, who gives him a job in the mailroom. When Brantley sees that his uncle and most of the other suits make horrible decisions for the company, he decides the best way to get ahead is to become a suit himself, and he invents a new executive named Carlton Whitfield. In the meantime, his aunt by marriage, Vera, played by Margaret Whitten, has taken a shining to him in sort of a creepy way, and he also falls for an exec named Christy, Helen Slater, who herself happens to be having an affair with Uncle Howard. If it all seems a bit confusing, I think it's sort of supposed to. After all, it does have many farcical elements to it, including a hilarious finale full of mistaken identities at a corporate gathering hosted at Uncle Howard and Aunt Vera's house. Some of the dialogue in this is definitely corny, and the soundtrack, though awesome, is a little more than overbearing at times. But this, for me, is a true guilty pleasure. It's a winner, and as far as 80s workplace and romantic comedies go, you could do much worse. Michael J. Fox was really at his peak of popularity here, which would explain its big success at the box office. Back to the Future was just 2 years in his rear view, and Family Ties was the number 2 show on television. And you could see why. His comedic timing is impeccable, and he's good at being a likable guy. Partially how Brantley could pull off being 2 separate people for a while. He's got charisma coming out of his ears like Michael J. Fox himself. This movie is kind of what guilty pleasures are all about. At its core, it's really probably not that good of a movie, but like Fox himself, it's got a lot of charm, and not to mention a huge nostalgia factor for me. And I give The Secret of My Success a B+. Joe?
The best thing about this movie is that Michael J. Fox is likable. That kind of goes without saying, but it really is the best thing about it. The actress, what was her name?
Helen Slater.
Helen Slater, who I think of as Supergirl,
Sure.
wasn't as bad as she was in said film, at least for certain scenes. The second thing that was really great about the film was the music. Yes, admittedly, as we all pointed out, did get a bit overbearing at points, but hey, great music is great music.
Quite every 3 minutes, it's
like,
to get tedious.
It's like, okay, like 2 minutes, 2-3 minutes, kind of getting slow again. What are we gonna do? Oh yeah, let's bring up that popular '87 sounds. Yeah, let's keep it rolling. Let's move that plot along.
Yeah, I was grooving.
Yeah, I was too. It was great. Yes, the story is pretty silly and quite unbelievable, but I guess that's the point. I think there was some kind of clever commentary on 80s big business that was in there somewhere. I thought some of the comedy elements did work, but some of the timing was really off. Then we come to my least favorite part of this film, and that's the romance. The romance element is beyond cheesy and cliche, and was by far for me the most unbearable part of the movie, and Supergirl's true terrible acting kind of revealed its ugly head, which was weird because she actually was kind of fooling me for a little bit and proved that she could kind of act. So I don't know if that was just torture for me personally, when they predicted into the future before I was even born. I'm not sure what was up with that. But still, I thought the ending was also really rushed, and I wasn't entirely sure what happened. So this film was a mixed bag for me. Still, I got some enjoyment out of it. So I'm actually going to do something different for Guilty Pleasure Month. I'm going to kind of review the film, give it a grade that's a little more critical, and then I'm going to try and look at it as a Guilty Pleasure film.
Okay.
Okay, all right. I think I would give this film a C- normally, but kind of getting into the spirit of Guilty Pleasure Month, I give it a C+.
Okay, that's fair. I like that.
Like, that way I can kind of show both sides, you know?
Justin, what'd you think?
Well, I'm not going to cover any ground that hasn't already been covered about Michael J. Fox's likability, but he can only do so much in a story this muddled. Comedy ranges from attempting for outrageous dark humor, which is usually unpleasant, slapstick, which, like most attempts in the subgenre of comedy, is generally hit or miss, and dry wit, which honestly is kind of boring. That's not to say that there aren't some entertaining moments from the supporting cast that really do end up making all the difference, giving possibly some of the best lines of the film. Notably from, as you mentioned it while we were watching it, his office buddy.
His office buddy. What was
the
his
mailroom
name?
buddy?
Mailroom
Yeah.
guy. The mailroom clerk guy was, I don't know if we know his name. Dan's looking it up now. That he did have some of the best lines.
I'm sorry. His one catch line during the chase scene was unbelievably funny.
And before you continue, Justin, I just remembered another great supporting character was his boss, God.
Yes. Absolutely.
That guy was pretty awesome.
Barney Radigan.
That's his name?
That is God.
Oh, man.
But I don't know the name of what's-his-face.
He'll just be the anonymous mailroom
Yeah,
friend.
just the anonymous mailroom friend.
Anyways, whoever you were, if you're still alive, hilarious. However, these amusing moments are few and very far between, and the long drag between them begins to feel exhausting. It's average rom-com entertainment, but ultimately, the secret of my success is nothing to write home about, and I give it a C.
I felt like you gave it a worse review than I did.
I mean, there were some good things going for it. I mean, Michael J. Fox is still fun to watch. It's
sure.
just, he's a fun actor in a not very fun story. Admittedly, as Dan likes to point out outside of the podcast, my comedy grades are usually one grade below what they should be. So
honestly, the funny thing I thought was interesting is that you were making these comments about this is, of course, once again how subjective comedy is. But you were making points about the dark humor and how slapstick's hit or miss and how dry wit's usually boring. But this is coming from a guy who really likes Sleeper. So I don't...
Which kind of implements elements of all three.
You know, I just thought that was interesting. I guess it just didn't work here for you.
No, I mean, in the right hands, comedy is a great aspect. It's just this tried to dance around with a bunch of different things.
Need to focus, I guess.
Dark humor for me is incredibly tough to do because... if you do it right, it's hilarious, but if you do it wrong, it becomes like a thriller. Mm-hmm. I've never seen any other comedy subsect do that. Mm-hmm. Slapstick is slapstick. You either love it or you don't. That's not to say that people who don't love it can't find humor in it. I mean, Edgar Wright enough said.
Well, that's true. Just to kind of touch on this point, Dan, since this is Guilty Pleasure Month, I mean, obviously you can admit this film's probably not the greatest, but you still really like it. And I was wondering... Why do you think you like this movie so much?
Well, huge fan of Michael J. Fox, and I don't know. It's funny. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit risque for. I was 10 when it came out, and there's definitely some sex humor in there. Mm-hmm. I'm a fan of farcical comedy, and I don't agree that it wasn't done well here. I believe you guys referred to it as slapstick, but I love farce. I think it's hilarious when done right, and there are a few scenes in this movie where it was done very, very well.
And I think we all agreed when it worked well, it did work well.
I will admit that the love story isn't acted or particularly written that well, but I did sort of enjoy the love square or rhombus, or I mean, there was a lot of people dating other people and wanting other people.
I guess it was kind of like just some light fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not a thinking man's movie. I mean, I have to say, I don't think it's particularly dated, other than the music.
I'm just curious. I know your final grade's a B+, and that's fine. If you were to take all, like, a lot of your personal feelings out of it, what do you think a realistic grade would probably be? I think it's
probably about a C or a C+.
So probably about where we are?
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, I can agree to that.
Okay, that's cool. I actually thought it had some enjoyable moments. I could kind of see how it could be a guilty pleasure.
I think a lot of comedy is sort of designed that way, and certainly a lot of 80s comedies.
It's definitely in that
hit that
vein,
zone. 20 plus years later.
And I guess you could say the same thing about a lot of those films, like, action movies, horror movies.
Sure.
Anything that's kind of fixed to a shtick, it kind of falls into that zone.
I would like to have you know, Dan, I was decidedly teetering on C or C+.
Well, good job. You said C, right? Right.
I'll tell you what. On 80s nostalgia, I'll bump it up to C+.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, sort of like we do with our Oscar nominees, you do have to take a little bit into account when this movie was made. It wasn't made last week. It was made 25 years ago. you could be a little bit, have a little bit of leeway, I think, for stuff like that,
I'm fine with my grade.
And speaking of which, that will lead us into our Oscar movie, which is 1970's Airport. We're going through all of the nominated films in the major categories from A to Z. This one won a Best Supporting Actress statuette for Helen Hayes, and it was nominated in 9 other categories, including another Supporting Actress nomination for Maureen Stapleton and Best Picture. Justin?
Mel Bakersfeld, played by Burt Lancaster, is the manager of a Chicago airport, trying to deal with a number of issues amidst a snowstorm, while struggling with his marriage to his wife Cindy, played by Dana Winter. Among these issues include an elderly, deceptive stowaway, played by Oscar winner Helen Hayes, and the possibility of a bomber being on board one of their flights. Like any airport, this film is incredibly busy with a number of things going on all at once. As such, the film takes a long time to get moving, and many of these storylines feel underdeveloped or completely useless, such as the one between Winter and Lancaster. That's not to say these characters aren't well acted, particularly from, as I mentioned before, Lancaster and Hayes, obviously well deserving of the Oscar, and allows the audience to have a moderate amount of interest in the fate of these individuals. However, as a result of trying to cover every single storyline, only a few have any real form of satisfactory completeness to them. That said, the suspense definitely builds alongside the film, and the clever editing for phone calls among several locations and persons never really get old, and possibly suggests it being a little ahead of its time. Airport is by no means a perfect film, but it is a blockbuster that never fails to keep its audience captivated, and it's no surprise that this led to several sequels following. Airport gets a B.
Joe, what'd you think?
All right. This is a movie that I actually watched a long time ago and got to revisit, and it was actually one that I enjoyed. I think I was probably pretty young when I watched it, maybe like 13 or 14. Okay. And I enjoyed it, and I still do. This movie has a grand plot and great acting. I think it's very ambitious, especially for the time, and much as Justin pointed out, it really is ahead of its time. There is a lot of cool editing tricks, and it just tries to captivate the audience in really interesting ways. I felt this movie was really trying to do a lot of things, and mostly succeeded in being both relatively believable with the human elements, but still kind of an epic drama for the time. It is a bit long, though, and it did kind of drag at points for me, and it does take a while to get going. Other than that, though, I thought the cinematography was quite good, and the performances were, my catchphrase, solid, and held together a really ambitious script. I give Airport a B+.
I guess I always had this illusion of Airport, since it's known as like the cornerstone for disaster movies, that it was kind of like the big budget blockbusters of the last few decades, but really it's not. You could almost compare it more to like a thriller than a straight ahead action movie. Mm-hmm. I think if I went into it with that frame of mind, I might have enjoyed it more, but it did seem to go a little bit slowly, like you mentioned. It sort of dragged a little bit in places, and obviously in 1970 you're not going to have the breakneck speed of movies from the MTV generation, but I was hoping for at least a little bit more. But looking at it for what it is, which is a groundbreaking film with pretty good acting, a very good story, and some good action once it gets started, I give Airport a B. I did think the acting from particularly the women, Helen Hayes and Maureen Stapleton, were both very, very good and deserving of their nomination and their win. Mm-hmm. And the guy with the bomb,
oh, I love that guy.
He was awesome.
No, that storyline was really dark for the time.
It really was.
It really was.
Yep. And that was my favorite part of the movie.
Martin's was kind of dark for its time, too, in a way.
Yeah, it was.
I mean...
Yeah, you made the reference while we were watching it that it was sort of the precursor to Flight.
I think the best way to put it is this movie is really ahead of its time. I thought it was,
oh, absolutely.
Truly.
It sets the stage for a lot of films that follow it, and I think it really has a good benchmark, really.
It does. Yeah, and like Justin said, you could see how, it released all those successful sequels.
I'm kind of sorry you went into it with this idea of it being like this big action movie, because it's really more of a thriller.
It really is, and the thriller aspects of it.
Yeah,
the thriller aspects of it were the best part. Mm-hmm. The character study stuff was like a little hit or miss.
That's because there's so many characters. I think it's not everybody gets their just desserts.
Like I think even you mentioned while we were just watching the credits, it has like 3 separate cuts.
Oh my gosh, there's like 30 people in the opening credits that they list. Yeah.
I don't know. The film just looks really good to me. I love it. I feel like it comes together really well.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one that if you've never seen it, and if you like any sort of the action movies of today, I think it's definitely worth a look to see
How it
kind of
progressed.
where that all started, yeah, and how it progressed from there. Mm-hmm. All right, well, good show. Not too many positive reviews, but hopefully we'll change that next week as we sort of burning off some this week, like Grudge Match and 47 Ronin. Look for the 5-word reviews that we're going to start doing on Twitter and Facebook. The Facebook group is Film Fanatics with an exclamation point. Join up on there if you'd like, and we'll always let you know when we have a new show up. And our Twitter is at Film Fanatics Pod. So look for the 5-word reviews there. And of course, we always mention on the Twitter as well when the new shows are up. And that's going to do it for us this week. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye!